Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we are finishing up The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods.
And just, another little disclaimer here. Of course, we have great respect for Evie Woods. We have respect for, I was going to say all authors, but caveat on that, because, we don't know. We respect the work gone into making a book and publishing a book, and we're going to try and not just not like things because we don't like things, which can be the case, like historical fiction, our downfall all the time, but...
It keeps coming for us.
I know. We, of course, are going to try and base our stances on something for the most part. But of course, there's just going to be stuff we don't like.
For sure. I would say, too, if you as a listener feel like there's a way in which we are not being critical and just being, I don't know, complainy, feel free to let us know, and we'll try to do better with that. But we'll try to come at this one with exactly a critical eye. And I will say, as we get into kind of the overall feelings of this book, like one thing we mentioned towards the end of last episode, but I think kind of remains true, is there is a lot of good stuff to talk about with this book. I feel like with other historical fictions, I feel like the historical fiction has often been the weak part of the book, but I luckily feel like in this book it actually gives us something to work with, and I was able to do some outside research and connect with the book a little bit more because of the historical aspect instead of feeling put off by it. So hopefully there'll be lots of good stuff.
Yeah, and then we'll obviously try and circle back to some of the things we talked about in the first part, like the morality of publishing after the author has passed, and just the rare book collection world in general, I think is a very interesting thing to talk about. But I guess we'll get into it with general vibes. How are you feeling? I guess you kind of mentioned, but still.
I would say overall, I think I wanted more from this book for sure. Like there are many ways in which I think the book was trying to do something cool and interesting, like clearly trying to come, I think, from more of a feminist historical angle, which is cool, but a lot of ways in which it didn't really meet what I thought it was trying to put down. So that being said, like I mentioned, there does seem to be a lot of inclusions in the book that are worth talking about, lend itself to criticism, that make me excited for conversation about it. But as far as sitting there and reading it, it wasn't really pulling me in. I mentioned last episode, characters didn't really compel me all that much. I wasn't that invested, and I didn't feel any more connected to the characters in this half of the book. So
I think we're pretty much the same in that regard. A lot of it felt very superficial, so it was hard to latch onto characters, as you mentioned. And I think there's just a lot going on. It doesn't feel that way when, you say superficial, and then also there's too much. But there's a lot of plot things happening that I don't think are necessary. And I think it's just the fault of kind of when you're writing a book and you have a simple concept, not a bad concept, I should say that. Simple does not mean bad, but it's just quite simple, right? You wonder, is this going to be enough to fill out a book? It usually is, to be fair. It usually is, once you actually start writing it and trying to give characters depth, all of that kind of stuff. But when you're planning it, it doesn't feel that way. And I think maybe that's what happened here. Because there's just a lot of additions, and what ended up happening is characters ended up feeling superficial when they should have been the focus, and then we just got kind of a disjointed story, I felt like.
I think the word you said there that's been on my mind is depth, because it feels like a lot of the things were added to increase the depth of the story, or at least increase kind of its complexity to be interesting enough for the reader, and I do feel like that was the downfall. It's there is too much going on. None of it actually feels like it's beefing up the point of the story as much as it just feels like a distractor.
Right. Yeah. But we can get more in-depth with our conversation, I suppose. And kind of, we're going to break this down like we did in the first part. This time, we're going to start with Opaline and kind of just wrap up everything that happens in the past. So I think, oddly enough, kind of Opaline's main story kind of circles around men, which we thought strange in the first part.
Yeah.
Because while not mutually exclusive, it is weird that a woman that wants to be independent and make her own name is kind of just only thinking about men for the most part, or at least that's what we're shown, right, throughout the book.
It feels like that because it's really one person after the next, really, right?
Right.
Like whenever we get to kind of a new chapter of Opaline's life, it's like, what man does that come with? This was one of the parts that was disappointing because it feels like it does kind of undervalue that independent part, right? Of like she's figuring out what her next step is, but she can't seem to do so without being influenced by whatever man is around. Like I kind of want her to, like, when she's out of the asylum, come back and be like, yeah, like I'm starting the bookshop up again, and like this is gonna be my thing. And I mean, maybe that does happen, but like we don't get to see it.
I mean, I will say, skipping ahead to the bookshop reopening, the only reason she does it is because Yosef tells her she should.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't want to, because she's scared of getting found again, and like her brother coming to find her.
Right.
And those are legitimate fears. Like, she has a genuine concern. She should leave Dublin, to be fair. Like, she should go to America like she planned, because obviously this man is going to stalk her until he dies. Like, she is not safe there. But, you know, one man is like, okay, but what if you did open it? And she's like, oh my God, you're so right. And then nothing happens, so it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
But let's like rewind a little bit, I guess, and start.
Yeah. I already even reeled us ahead.
Yeah. And let's talk about like the reason why she should not trust men, I guess. Because she has a couple of bad relationships, even just in general. Like, I think his name's like Ravel, one of the booksellers, who apparently sells her out to her brother. Right. And then obviously we have Armand, who turns out to be a jackass for kind of no reason.
Yes.
But like, yeah, she's set up to not trust men, but yet here we are. So
yeah. I kind of feel like the whole Armand character was just there so that way she would distrust men, which is kind of crazy because she already has her brother for that.
Right.
I found that the Armand relationship was disappointing to begin with, right? In the first half, I mentioned this in the first episode, but it didn't actually... Not only did it not go anywhere, but they continued to paint Armand in this very specific light, like he was there to serve that villain purpose. And I'm bothered by it still because of the racial aspect, right? Like, they mentioned he's Moroccan, there was the whole exotic street urchin, all that crazy business that they described Armand as. And then, yeah, they kind of made him more directly misogynist, right? Like, I think his whole character was... we need to have a man who we get close to, but be reminded that misogyny is alive and well. And so we're going to paint the picture of Armand the misogynist instead of Armand the complex character, living in the context of society and perpetuating misogyny.
Yeah, because there's like, obviously I mean, we don't ever see it, but the assumption is he sleeps with a lot of women, which like causes weird jealousy between like Opaline, even though they're not exclusive. And like, that's fine. That's whatever. Of course, that could be misogynistic because men can do it, women can't, whatever. That's not really discussed a lot, but I guess we're supposed to think him misogynistic for having a trait like that. And then obviously when they meet up again and the manuscript gets brought up, it's like he starts taking ownership over that accomplishment and is like, you know, I can talk to this person and like, you can't sell this on your own. I have to do it. And like, that is obviously misogyny, but also, I don't know, like him saying like, it's our accomplishment. Yeah, that sucks. Like, throw him in the garbage. But he's not entirely wrong. Like, would she, first of all, at this point in her life, in most of her life, I don't know how Henry comes to this assumption, but like, at no point does she become well known within the book collection scene. Like,
right.
That never happens.
Notoriety.
Right.
Yeah.
So her not having the connections, her probably being swindled out of the money for the manuscript, that logic makes sense. Both because she's not like shown to be well within the scene, and also because she's a woman during that time period. Like, Armand is not wrong about that. Like, we twist the language just enough that he becomes misogynistic, but like, I think at its core, it's like not enough to really villainize him, I think, as much as the author wanted.
Yeah. So I fully agree with you. Like, that's kind of what I was feeling during that conversation of like, he's not wrong. He's just coming at it in a really bad way because of the ownership aspect, right? Like, he could have been like, listen, like, this is the landscape of things. Do you want my help? And then things would have been a lot better, right? But instead he decided to kind of, just assume that he would have a good part in it. That's a problem, but it doesn't feel like enough for what happens, right? Because first of all, she kind of did this to test him anyway, right? Like bringing up the manuscript. She was like, I don't know if I trust him, like telling him about the kid, so I'm going to tell him about this other thing that I still really can't trust him to know about, which was weird. And tells him, and then he kind of comes out with this reaction. And it's like she was really just like kind of digging for something to get mad at him about, right? When she finds it, that's when she kind of goes off on him. And I don't think she uses the word misogynist, but that's kind of what she's telling him off for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that conversation ends with him using like a French slur, like a French equivalent of a slur, right? And I think that is there specifically so we can be like, okay, yes, he's a misogynist. Let's brush him off. We'll never have to see him again. But without him using that word, I'm like, I don't know if that's enough. Like, I don't know if it's enough for be like, yes, I'm going to label this character a capital M misogynist. Again, like as opposed to being like, this is a man who's existing and benefiting from misogyny, but isn't necessarily like looking to be a misogynist, like looking to perpetuate those things. He's looking to work within it, which doesn't help necessarily. But as far as like propagating it, I don't know. I feel like he's not a proponent of misogyny until we hear him say that word.
Yeah, and I think it's just like such a simple way to think of misogyny. Like somebody who flirts with a lot of women and like is working within a misogynistic area of work, basically. It's like, okay, but we can be a little bit more nuanced than that, right? But obviously not here, so.
Yeah, and I'll plant the seed now, but get into it more later. Like I do think like the fact that Armand is such a focus as a villain character compared to some of the other men that Opaline goes on to, flirt, interact, etc. with, like it's such a bold choice because these other men are not better, in my opinion. And at least Armand has a job he's supposed to do here when he's doing this stuff.
Yeah, he was cool. Like, I don't know. He was a good character. We saw very little of him, but like...
But he was the most fleshed out man she was with.
For sure. Because who is the next man? It's Matthew. Well, I mean, they kind of overlap because we get cheating. Armand and Opaline obviously aren't together, but Matthew is with a wife, and they have a child together, and yet... they kind of have this, like, I mean, they cheat full on. They, like, kiss in the first part. They don't seem to do anything in the second part, but the way Opaline kind of, like, desires that, like, intimacy with him, even just in the, like, domestic way, is kind of like emotional cheating. Like, they kind of just emotionally cheat for years, I feel like.
Yeah, I guess they don't specifically say anything else happens between them. I kind of thought it did. Like, it doesn't get confirmed, but I just thought that's what was happening. But I think you're totally right. Like, they do allow themselves to kind of, they gain a special trust for one another that does feel like more than friends type of trust, like they're, and like, because it's a little unearned, right? They're doing it because they kind of fancy each other, right? It doesn't seem like they're doing it just because they like, at least at first, just because they like each other as people. It's like, no, I'm like willing to lean into an extra nice comfort, next level comfort because of it. It's shady.
It is, for sure. And it's also completely unnecessary because if the idea is we need Opaline to trust him, and this is going to be a problem throughout this entire book, but they could just be friends.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy concept. Like, She ends up trusting the manuscript to him. And it's like, okay, but did she have to be in love to do that? No, she could have just loved him as a friend and trusted him to be a good man. And like that didn't need any romantic connotations. But for some odd reason within this book, that's just not like a thought that crosses anybody's mind.
Yeah. And this is where I'm going to keep bouncing back to Armand as we talk about these other guys. Like, this is number one where I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Like, from the start, that you're involved with this man via cheating. Like, that's the only way you can be because he's married and, committed. So the fact that you're like, I don't trust Armand basically because I get bad vibes. Because before they have that last conversation, that's really what it is, right? It's like, I've got bad vibes because Armand is a book dealer and does book dealing things. Beyond that, there's not really a good reason to not trust him, in my personal opinion. However, with Fitzpatrick, it's like, from the start, he's doing something untrustworthy. He's being secretive. He's cheating on his wife, and you're instigating it. But I guess because you're instigating it, suddenly it's okay. Like, that doesn't seem right. Like, you shouldn't trust him, really. He's displaying in his interactions with you that he's not a trustworthy man.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a fault in Opaline's character that just doesn't get mentioned, but she does on a few occasions think she's better than other women. I think she does it in this case with Fitzpatrick. Like, the cheating never gets mentioned, it never becomes a problem. And she still thinks about Fitzpatrick, like, in a domestic setting, even though he is married. Like, the wife, he just does not think, they don't think about her at all, which is, like, such a disservice to her as a fellow woman. And then, like, in the asylum, it's like, it becomes such a, I'm sane and I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
But I'm being compared to these other women that are actually sick. And it's like, okay, but you're all being abused. So, like, can we rally for a moment here? Like, you're not above them. I don't know what to tell you. So
yeah, now suddenly she wants to be actually independent when she's in those situations.
Right. So it is, like, kind of like internalized misogyny a little bit, strangely. And then also just typical ableism in the case of the asylum.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
We don't even, like, learn Fitzpatrick's wife's name. We never meet her. She never comes up. Like, she is nobody.
Yeah, this is just where it's a shame that the character is this way. I think it's okay, right? Obviously, it's okay to have a flawed main character, but these flaws are not being acknowledged. And so I think it's kind of implied that we're supposed to think this is the right thing to do, or the right way to go about this. But I can't see it that way without any sort of acknowledgement. And I can't see it that, like, you know, she goes on to interact with Fitzpatrick in this way, and we're supposed to be like, yeah, like, good for her. Like, that doesn't, I don't see how that's supposed to happen for the reader.
Right. It's just like, throughout this book, cheating is just romanticized, I think. Because, like, Opaline and Martha, and even Henry a little bit, like, they're going through such terrible things. They should get to be happy. And it's like, okay, that concept is fine. It makes sense. But we shouldn't be cheating, and we shouldn't, like, be okay with cheating, because it is dishonesty. Like, Matthew and Henry are dishonest men that should not be trusted. Like, they have done something, and I'm not saying they can't get better. Like, this could be a lapse,
right? Sure,
but usually people who cheat continue to cheat. Like,
yeah. We're definitely not in a position where they're earning trust back, right? Like, it is very much like it is happening, and we still trust them nevertheless. I think it would be another thing, yeah, if, like, they did these things, it came out that they did these things, and over a long period of time, trust was re-earned, right? But that's not what's happening here.
Yeah, and that's part of, like, just this book having three main characters. I feel like I say that so many times. There's three main characters, and there's a lot going on, and so we don't get that time, but. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens.
A lot of books we've read have been a lot of this, though. Like, I don't know if this is just because we choose this way, or this is how books are these days, but yeah, there tends to be a pattern here of too many main characters, not enough time.
I wonder if that's, like, another, like, ties into what I mentioned at the start of this, where, like, you think you need more than you need. And also, like, it's a very easy way to characterize your characters. Like, instead of having Henry just be through Martha's perception, he has his own chapters where you can easily, like, get into his head. So you don't have to, it's like, I guess, yeah, it is just, it's easier. I guess it's the simple way to put it. Like, you don't have to spend as much time trying to, like, indirectly characterize him. You can just do it very clearly.
I get it. Like, it feels like it'd be more comfortable to write that way if you already know what you want that character to be presented as, right? And I can see it from, like, you know, the publisher's aspect of reading a book like that, like, hopping between characters it kind of keeps you engaged a little bit more, right? You can get the different perspectives. The story changes a lot. You know, it's harder for it to drone on in any one direction when you have this constant change. But that, on the other hand, though, like, that is what this book was. It did the constant change, but then the other problem now is that none of them pull me in enough. None of them are fleshed out enough for me to be like, yeah, I really want to see what this character is getting into. I really cheer for this character. So I guess there's maybe a balance in between those things, but I do understand why they went for it.
Yeah. In this book, I felt like it skipped such important moments because it was trying to both progress time in a way that made sense. I don't know if it accomplished that. And then also it was skipping between characters. So, like, we would just miss conversations between, like, Martha and Bowden. And then obviously we have the weird chapter 35 where we both thought it was, like, a weird dream sequence because it didn't make any sense. So yeah, just you lose context within it for some reason. But I think that's because you're skipping characters and also because you're skipping time.
Yeah, there were some pretty big time skips in the Opaline section of the book.
Yeah.
Where it'd be like, oh, suddenly like 6 years have passed. It's like, whoa, that's crazy.
That whole asylum bit, like I don't know, it's just like another instance in which somebody goes through something traumatic and we just kind of like brush it off. It's like, it's fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
No exploration of it. Like, we talked about this in the first part of like whether or not there would be more of an exploration into trauma and the traumas that have already been shown. We kind of more develop the asylum trauma, I guess, in the second half, but then that doesn't get explored either, along with the fact that the traumas of the first half of the book also don't get explored anymore, right? No more Henry, no more of like Martha with Shane. Like, those get totally thrown out. There's no more contending with any of that, and it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah, Henry for sure. Like, he gets nothing else in the second half of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Martha, at least at some moments, she's like, can I trust Henry? Like, I trust, like, I've trusted men before and it's turned out bad. Like, she has
That's fair.
moments like that, but then it turns on and off whenever it's convenient. And like we mentioned in the first part, it's really used more as a way to like stall their relationship so they don't just end up together too soon, basically. Yeah. But yeah, there's nothing really deep about any of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. We should talk about this last man that Opaline ends up with.
Yes.
Yosef.
So, of course, even though she thinks, like, love is dead and it's not in her future, which is almost a direct quote from the first part of this book, she does actually think that for a bit, that, like, love is not going to be for her and all that. And that can change, but, like, it's another thing we don't, like, develop through or, like, work on. It's just, like, she's over love and then she finds her soulmate, who is this Joseph Wolf, who's an Austrian prisoner of war in Ireland. And she does think sometimes, like once, that maybe he's killed some people because, you know, obviously there's a war going on. And then she doesn't think about it again because he's sitting in her shop and he's fixing something up and he just looks so handsome. And it's like, how could anybody so handsome actually be awful, you know?
Yeah, it wasn't enough for Armand, I guess, but good enough for Joseph. I have a lot of thoughts about this, so bear with me for a moment because, you know, I at this point I've beat to death the Armand thing, but I need to reemphasize that I don't think there was a whole lot for her to not trust about Armand, and this was after exoticization and everything. Now we have Joseph show up unannounced, sneaking into her building. And it's like, yeah, I did actually fight in the army for Hitler, which should have really put Opaline off. Like, she's like, wow, that Hitler guy's horrible. And it doesn't matter even a little bit, really. Like, she's like, ooh, like, you know, Hitler bad, but Joseph good. Like, that's all it gets down to. Joseph is like, yeah, like, you know, do you really think we had a choice? Like, we had to fight, basically. And so I had to question that a little bit of like, okay, let's like look into, you know, the author's clearly done some historical research, but I want to go ahead and corroborate. Is that actually what happened? And like, can we trust that Joseph is not just a Nazi? And I think there's a good chance that he's not, but let's get into it a little bit. So Austria voted, over 99% of Austrians who could vote, which of course was not including the Jewish population, voted for Germany to annex Austria. 700,000 Austrians were in the Nazi party. 1.3 million of them were drafted to fight, which is a lot more than the number of people who were in the party. But on the other hand, only 100,000 of them were in resistance. So a very small amount of all Austrians were actually resistant to the Holocaust. So to argue that this man, like to tell the story that Joseph is a man from Austria who was anti-Hitler but ended up in the army and then a prisoner of war in Ireland, like, doesn't exactly feel like the story that needed to be told. And so even if that is the case, I'm anti-Joseph because I don't think he should exist in this book. It feels unnecessary. And it's also not even confirmed, right? Like, we don't actually know that he is one of those people. We just know he was having a bad time as a soldier, but we don't actually know that he was anti-Nazi. But Opaline doesn't bother to ask, doesn't bother to get into it. He's, like you said, he's all handsome, he's all nice. So there's no digging into whether or not he's actually one of these people, and she's not willing to investigate it further. Why is this character in this book? Like, why did we totally just push like the Moroccan character to the side, say he was untrustworthy, test him much more than he deserved on that, and question it all the time, but then give not more than a single question to the person who came out of the Nazi army?
Yeah, the conversation kind of just goes, Opaline is like, you serve under that Hitler guy, he's crazy. And then Yosef is like, you think everybody who fights with him is like with him or something like that. Which isn't exactly like a negative. Like, it's not like he's saying, yeah, Hitler is crazy, fuck that guy. Like, it's like kind of so nonchalant that he could just be, I don't necessarily think he's for Hitler, but I don't think he cares.
Yeah. I think he just didn't want to go to war, which, like, fine, but like also like, I don't know, I'm like, why write a character into this that isn't more clear on that, you know, without like acknowledging the potential flaw of that direction, right? Without being like, you know, without making a point that Opaline is not digging into it, right? Without saying that Opaline should have dug in more, but she didn't, and therefore she might have just ended up with a former Nazi or not. Like, there's no exploration into that, it's just given.
Right. And I think it's supposed to be like he's nice, so he can't be a Nazi. Like, you're supposed to trust that judgment, which is fine. But again, it's like very simple, right? Like, yeah, he's nice to Opaline and like the Irish, but that's because they're not Jewish. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, when you actually give him somebody who's like Black or Jewish or like disabled or any of, you know, anyone else other than like white English or Irish, what becomes the situation there? Like,
I'm sure plenty of folks who were in the Nazi party, especially those who weren't actually out fighting, quote, seemed nice, you know. But yeah, you're right. Like, the context is important.
And then it just didn't matter, did it? It just didn't matter.
No,
like, Yosef didn't need to exist.
And he wasn't a character. He was like a name. Like, he wasn't actually a character, right? He doesn't get any development, really. We get his story, but we don't get development. I don't actually know who he is as a person besides, like, he likes to tinker and is kind of quiet. Like, that there's not really, like, a good back and forth between them. Like, like I said, Armand is the most fleshed out one in the book, but if we go in order here, like, that's how they were fleshed out. Like, Armand was the most fleshed out. I feel like Fitzpatrick was the second most fleshed out, and Yosef was the least. Like, I kind of don't know why we landed on him and took the leap into including a character with kind of this controversial background if we weren't going to actually give him full character depth.
Yeah, he's supposed to be this, like, fixer of broken things, and Opaline is supposed to be one of those broken things in this moment. But, like, yeah, sure, right? Like, he doesn't need to be there, and she doesn't need a man to fix her.
But I don't know, she does in this book, right? Like, the character is written that she needs a man to come do things for her. I mean, it's the same way that a man handed her the bookshop, and Yosef is the man to hand her that manuscript that she's been missing her whole life. Like, she doesn't even actually do any of the work to get that back. Yosef just gives it to her. And that's supposed to be a sign that they are, in fact, soulmates, I guess. But, like, it's, again, like, where is actually Opaline's independence in this book? Where does she develop herself?
Oh my God, you confused me so much. You said the manuscript.
Oh, yeah, not the Bronte one.
the Charles Dickens one, that from the beginning. Yes. Yeah, it's supposed to be like a full circle moment. But yeah, she's supposed to be spending her life finding that book, but it's just handed to her, right? And it's just constantly men that are doing that. Her life is just being pulled around by men. Like, it's either her brother ruining her life, or it's these men that are coming to save her, basically, is the entire thing.
But it's still up to the jury of men how well her life goes.
Right. And it doesn't make sense, and it's also completely unnecessary in the writing of her character, especially because Henry tells us that she's supposed to be one of the most, like, well-known rare book collectors during that time period. Like, she is famous within the context of this book, but we don't see any of that work. We don't see any of that renown. Like,
yeah, and people don't seem to know she went to an asylum for 20 years. Like, I feel like if that were well known, Henry wouldn't have had to find that out himself.
Right. And the fact, oh my God, the Google search is still crazy. But, like, we need to get into him researching, because this man needs to go back to school for real. But just finishing up Opaline, I feel like it really is just down to the men. Like, we get some asylum chapters, I guess, but yeah, she dissociates through most of it and then doesn't deal with that trauma in the aftermath. And it's just kind of like, I don't know. The asylum is important, right? It's necessary, but it also just feels like a way to time skip her life a little bit.
Yeah.
And nothing comes of it, really.
It's interesting you say it's necessary, because when I was reading those parts, I was like, why is this necessary? I think, yes, maybe some like major roadblock was necessary for her, but in a book where I don't really think she like bounces back from it and like becomes a strong character of her own, it didn't really feel necessary, because it just felt like another thing that was taking away agency. I guess like that would make sense if it felt contrasted, and it doesn't feel contrasted. It just feels sad, kind of like, to be like, wow, like this woman was basically stripped away of her ability to live an independent life for a long time, even though she had already been doing so. And like, I'll, you maybe like the historical aspect of people who don't know that this is a thing that happened, or like don't understand how that might have impacted someone, like this is a good way to create sympathy for that. But it doesn't, to me, develop Opaline's character. It just feels like a sad story.
Right. I think what I mean is Opaline by this point isn't really a necessary character at all. Like, she doesn't have agency, right? I think she becomes important, and the trauma, this is classic, right? A woman going through horrors and trauma to like further the plot of basically somebody else. It's partially important for Henry's character because he decides he wants to kind of uplift these kind of stories and like shine a light on them and how people were like scrubbed from history or mistreated through history. Like that, her going through this is important for that reason, kind of. And also it's a way in which we like stop her from publishing or trying to publish or like sharing Bronte's manuscript, right? Like that needs to be lost for the purposes of this book. I say it should just be taken out of the book, but we'll get there. But yeah, Opaline has it, right? And she cannot have it. So what happens? She needs to be locked away and it needs to be lost somewhere else. So yeah, I think it's less like important to Opaline's character that she's locked up here. I think it's important to drive the plot, and I think it's important for Henry in some unnecessary weird way that she gets locked up, basically.
I guess that makes sense. Don't like it though.
Yeah.
I guess part of why Lyndon wants to do anything like this is because Opaline is pregnant, right? Like he kind of describes it as she's a scourge on the family and he needs to hide her away. I don't really know who knows what Opaline is up to besides him to believe that. Like this is just him and his stalker friends that I think could possibly form that opinion, because who else from home even knows what she's up to?
I think it's talked about that they know she's disappeared.
Right.
But like, yeah, she's going by a different name at this point. I mean, Opaline, she still kept that for some reason, like an idiot. Yeah. But her last name is at least different. So he's just obsessed.
Yeah. I guess it felt like revenge more is the more strong token of this, of like, oh, like Opaline has gotten away from me this far. Like she embarrassed me by not marrying my friends. Like I'm going to like continue to stalk her. Oh my God, she's pregnant. Great. Now I can go send her away.
And I think that's the case. I think Lyndon, like, for a moment, is almost humanized at the end of this book. I don't think it's necessary. I think he is just, like, a crazy control freak.
Yeah.
And is the capital M misogynist of this book. Like, we didn't need Armand in the picture. We had Lyndon this whole time.
No, truly.
So, yeah. It's, like... It is just revenge and, like, wanting to make her miserable. And I think that's fine. I think that could be the end of that whole situation. I don't think we need any more depth to what he had to go through in the first war or, like, what their relationship actually is. We didn't need any of that. Just make him a monster. It happens.
It was weird to, like, have the whole, so I liked the scene where she busted herself out finally. I thought that was good. But like she sets up this whole thing where it's like, I'm gonna sneak off, you're still gonna get your money, Lyndon's not gonna know any better of it, and then like come down the line, that's not true, right? She is gonna do something about it and get involved. Maybe that's a whole other conversation of whether or not she should have done that, but that's not true. Like that's not gonna sustain. She's gonna continue being involved with Lyndon.
Right, which is why I think she should have just went off to America, called it a day. I mean, maybe travel would have been tougher because of the war going on and stuff like that, but I don't know. She could have done something.
Yeah. I will say the part of this where, like, the first couple of chapters of this asylum section made me wish we had read a little bit more in the first half, because this is where I started making theories that were definitely coming true, though maybe they were obvious. Like, they mention just before she ends up in there how she's like, I've heard of mother's wards where like they send women who are having babies on their own to have the baby, and then they like send those babies off for adoption or whatever. Which is crazy because she's the one who thinks that, and she doesn't make the connection later on. So I was like, that's definitely what's going to happen to her. Like, she's going to have that baby and they're going to get rid of it, and she's not going to know any better. And so when they say it's stillborn, I was like, oh, that's definitely what's happening here. That baby is not stillborn.
Yeah, to be fair, like, she had just gone through a night of labor in which she was probably actively giving birth and then had to hold it, basically, because nobody wanted to help her. So she was in, and then childbirth in general is just extremely painful. Like, It is trauma on your body. So, like, her not hearing anything or kind of, like, disassociating in that moment, I feel like that makes sense for me.
Yeah, I get you.
And then she does kind of, like, float the idea of, like, her daughter still being out there somewhere. And just kind of, like, waiting, basically, for her daughter to find her, I think is what she tells Jane in the letter. Which is kind of ridiculous. Like, how is your daughter ever going to know? You should probably go look for her. But, whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that she's able to go back to the bookshop and live her life and not think about that enough to, like, put effort into it.
Right. Like, the options are her child was kidnapped or her child died. And she doesn't really think about it at all. She's like, oh my God, a new man in my life? We're soulmates. And it's like, girl, you have a daughter that you loved. Like, she loved her child.
Yeah, she was excited.
Yes, she was excited. And suddenly it's just like gone through absolute trauma, like medical trauma, childbirth trauma, possible child death or kidnapping of your child. And like, we're not thinking about it at all. Because like, the situation is, if your child was kidnapped, they were kidnapped by Lyndon. Like, do you really want your child to have been associated with that man?
Right.
Like, what are we thinking about here?
Yeah, I guess, like, the other thing that came to mind here that I predicted for later in the book was that, like, Lyndon made this happen not just by, like, the gaslighting aspect where he's making her seem crazy by setting up another story, right? But the fact that he's paying them off, right? He's paying off that doctor to keep her there. And, like, for me, like, that should have crossed her mind too. Like, she's just like, oh, like, they believe a man's word over a woman's, and it's like, yeah, that's probably true too, but also, like, it's just your brother, like, he's gonna do crazy things, like pay them off to make sure you stay here. Like, I understand she was undergoing a lot, right? She's undergoing trauma. She's had just given birth to what she thinks is a stillborn baby, and up until that point had been treated horribly. There's lots of reasons for her to not be thinking carefully about this, but I do think she had the ability to do so and figure out what was going on.
Yeah, who do you think is paying for your service there? Like, obviously it's a member of your family. But she's so concerned about making herself seem sane. And it's just like, it doesn't matter. And
it's
also,
actually so frustrating to read all of those scenes where she's like, if I just make a logical argument, it's like, actually say less. Like, don't say anything at all.
Right. And it is just frustrating because, like, yes, you're being mistreated, and obviously you don't deserve to be there because you're not, like, insane. But also the women around you who you know are, like, physically and mentally disabled, they also don't deserve to be there. Like, you are not more deserving of freedom than they are. But, like, I guess that's the 1920s perspective, right? Like, yes, they should be in a place like this because they're actually ill. It's like, no, all of you should be treated like human beings.
Right,
but,
right.
Like, it's just, like, such clear ableism that obviously we don't talk about.
And honestly, this is giving me a different perspective on the Mary character, which because I had liked the Mary character as, like, a potential companion, and then of course she's immediately dead, so it doesn't matter. But I feel almost like that character was included there to be like, ah, yes, one of us, right? To be like someone like me who is not like everyone else. So it maybe to complexify and be like, yeah, there's more than one woman here who doesn't, like, meet the qualifications to be in a place like this. But yeah, like, it does kind of reinforce that us versus them of, like, there are people who deserve to be here.
The asylum part, I think, is interesting in the fact that, yes, stories like this exist, and it's crazy that they exist, and they still happen, and we should talk about those things, but I feel like it was not needed within this book.
Yeah, it felt like that was kind of the only reason for it being here, is like, just like, we should tell a story like this because it existed, not necessarily because it was, I don't know, a great contributor to the story's development.
Right. But she does eventually break out. I saw a review that was like, why didn't she just do this like
I
20 years earlier?
was feeling that too. I understand that maybe like some development and thought would have need to happen to make her think to do that, but I do think it could have happened sooner than 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years is crazy. But yeah, Opaline basically doesn't hide away, mostly because of what Yosef says in regards to the shop, but then she also decides to ruin Lyndon's life.
Yeah, and it's impressive that she's able to pull the stuff together to do it.
Yes, considering she should have no connections and know nobody, and like she is also a nobody. She makes it seem her and Henry, they make it seem like such an easy little digging of information. Like, oh, I just sat down for an afternoon and now I have all of this information. Like, that's crazy. Right. Why didn't you do this sooner? You know? But yeah, she compiles, I think, information about him having killed a bunch of people. Not just deserters, but like people who wore their hats wrong or whatever during the First War. Like, he was doing a lot of terrible stuff. And being a control freak, like we mentioned. But it's enough to ruin his reputation for like ever. And then obviously she has to do the unnecessary scene in which she confronts her abuser for like the last time type of situation. Fully unnecessary. Also, I'm surprised she did not die in this moment. She should have.
Like, when she shows up to his door alone, I was like, it's over. It's over for her. Like, I don't know why she thinks she's able to power play him here. Like, she's never been able to successfully do that. Like, the power play is the newspaper thing. Let that be the power play. We don't need to show up to the door and own him, you know?
Right. It's obviously, I mean, it's another moment in which this is just kind of used to further other aspects of the plot.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. She should have died. And also, it's like, it isn't satisfying anyway, because... she doesn't win that exchange, I would say.
She's unsuccessful. Of course she is. Like, Lyndon is so experienced at this bullshit now.
Yeah, and her warning him, basically, about the newspaper, I think is almost a kindness. Like, he's able to kill himself so that he doesn't have to deal with seeing it, right? Like, he never has to, experience it in the moment. He gets like an early out from all of it. He doesn't have to deal with any of those consequences. So like her going there is like, it's the opposite of the power play, right? But we need to find out that Lyndon is actually her father for some reason. It's so unnecessary.
So ridiculous. Dude, when she's like, I had this underlying, like, sneaking suspicion of what he was going to tell me next, and that's what he says, I was like, no, you did not.
No.
You did not you had no good reason to believe that.
Right. And like the age range maybe could be a tip-off because they're 20 years apart, but also men were marrying such younger women at that time period. They still want to be clear. But like, so like the 20-year age gap is not that unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it felt like a plot twist for the sake of drama, but it hadn't been earned in any point in this book.
Yeah, and also, what's the point? Like, it doesn't justify his behavior anymore, or even explain it anymore. Like, the behavior made sense either way. Like, he was just that kind of person. It didn't matter that he was actually her father. And it's the whole thing of, like, you know, it's a little different because they're still related, but it's like, him being your biological father doesn't make him your father anyway, so...
It doesn't matter within any of it, but I think it's just supposed to be shocking for the sake of shock.
Yeah. And it gives a justification to why she showed up in the first place, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then the other point is Lyndon, which this could have been the only thing brought up during this entire scene. Lyndon bringing up that the child didn't die. It was actually sold off to this one family. And we get the name of the family, but I can't remember it. And obviously, we need that name to tie it to the Martha storyline, because I was right about that.
Yeah.
But... that, like, him giving that information could have been the moment of revenge from him. That like, him being cruel one last time was supposed to be the father twist, but it could have just been this. Like, yes, your baby is alive and you will never see it, and I've sold it to this family.
Right. I think that you're right. That would have been enough, because I also didn't enjoy sitting through I had to do what I did in order to make sure we were successful in war story.
I know. Oh my god. All the war stuff was
It's like, you didn't understand, and no one thanks me for any of the things I do for this nation or my family. Like, you don't thank me for saving you from embarrassment by sending you off to an asylum. Like, what? He's so annoying. I just can't stand him.
Yeah, and I do think it's supposed to be, like, trying to force nuance into this character for some reason.
It feels like the same kind of nuance as, well, he wasn't really a Nazi.
I know,
Even though that wasn't even as
yes.
much complexity as that got. But where it's like, it's all more, all more complicated than it seems, but we're not going to get into it. Like, I do think it was supposed to create some sort of sympathy in that you see, like, why Lyndon did these things and what Lyndon believes is, like, necessary, but it's not enough for sympathy, right? Like, I don't agree with him, and even so, like, it's that whole like that thank you complex. Like, why am I not being thanked for doing what I think was making the right but tough decisions? Like, it doesn't line up because they weren't the right decisions. And, like, Opaline's argument back to him is weak. She's like, well, that still doesn't justify it. And it's like, that's really all you have to say about that? Like, you should just stop listening to him, because anything he says, like, there's no good argument for. He's just shitty.
Yeah, I think this conversation at the end was like a last ditch effort kind of to make him more interesting than he appeared, but it's just like it doesn't matter at this point, right? Like, he's gonna kill himself in the next scene.
Yeah.
But that's Opaline, basically. Yeah, I guess the main takeaway is I was right. The child we hear about still being alive somewhere ends up being related to Martha. So, obvious tie into Martha, let's just talk about Martha and Henry. We've already discussed the way in which they are not dealing with their trauma anymore at this point. Henry's had his conversation with his father.
All is solved.
All is solved, all is forgiven. Martha's ex-husband is dead, so we don't need to think about that.
And she likes to read now, too.
The switch from I hate reading, it's triggering for me, to I read all these books, because Madame Bowden just leaves them for me and I love her. I'm like, okay, this is crazy.
It's fully unjustified. But also, like, the trauma part, I think is the one I understood the least, the reading one. I think I mentioned that last episode where I was like, I don't even know how this trauma came to be, but even with the explanation, it's like, it didn't really get a great explanation. It didn't really get a good resolution. It just was and then wasn't.
Yeah. I will say the explanation that I gave it, I can't remember if it was true in the book or not. But like, me saying, oh, her being able to read people versus being able to read books and one being louder than the other, that could have been it, right? But the weird thing about this book is we have magic and we just kind of don't deal with it in any capacity.
It's barely relevant. Yeah.
It's not at all. I would take it out of the entire book. Yeah.
It was kind of a red herring. I mean, and it was not unlike the book description. Like, it set something up that didn't come to fruition. Like, I felt like I got excited for something that never came, which of course then only leaves you disappointed.
Definitely. But Martha and Henry, their relationship can basically be summed up as will they, won't they, but in the worst way possible. They're obviously interested in each other, but also they come to this kind of friendly agreement. I thought it was friendly because they were smiling while they were talking about it, where Martha is kind of like, doesn't want to be in a relationship because she kind of needs to like find herself again, is basically how she sets it up.
Right.
And Henry seems to support this idea. And yet we go on chapters where they are sad that they're not together and also believe they can't support each other because they're only friends. And I would say that is almost direct quotes from this book.
Yeah.
Them being like, oh, I wish I had him in my life, but we're only friends. And I'm like, what is happening here? Like, what?
Friendship sounds so sad that way.
I know. It's like, you can support each other and be there for each other and love each other as friends. Yeah. And it's like, but it's set up like they can't do those things because they're not romantically involved.
It's just the wrong descriptor for what it is. What they're really doing is taking a break from each other. And that's fine, but say it. Don't be like, this is what friendship looks like for me.
Their relationship is just so frustrating because they're just getting in each other's way.
Yeah.
And like, Henry's sad as hell for like no reason. Like, Martha's trying to be better and you're like sad about it. Just like, get over yourself.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to where's the development, right? Like, where's the, like, why do I care about this relationship? Like, I don't know if the development was there before, but it's definitely not happening now.
Right. It's reading the end of this book really felt like reading the same scenes over and over again. Like, it's so monotonous towards the end.
Also, like, Martha was so close to be, like, she was on the right track to be like, I really should take some time. I think that was smart.
Yes.
To be like, I should
for
take some
sure.
time. Like, I kind of just went through a lot, and, like, maybe this is good for me, but, like, not right now. Like, I need to think about it first and make that decision. But I don't even know if she really gets to take that time and have those thoughts. It just kind of, she can't stop thinking the way she was thinking before. Like, she can't take a step back and look at it from the outside, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, be really, truly reflective of the situation.
She is just so, like, interested in him and, like, missing him and upset that she won't be a part of his life, even as a friend. Like, she's wrapped up in those thoughts, right? And that just causes her to, like, not be able to kind of build herself. And there's also this weird kind of fight between them that's happening at the same time, where she's upset that he is still looking for the manuscript and thinks he's only there for the manuscript, right? Like, that's a concern for a little bit. I think it's fine if you think... Okay, it's two ways. I think it's fine if you think he's obsessed with this manuscript, because he is, right?
Yeah.
But I don't... I guess that the problem comes in, like, the whole ghosting situation was never resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, her thinking he came back for the manuscript when he left her a letter, and they supposedly talked about that whole situation. We don't see it, but they talked about it, I think. Like, I don't understand why she's having those thoughts. And I don't know why Henry, like, enforces them either for a moment. When he lies to her and is like, yeah, I'm here for the book. And then 2 seconds later, he's like, actually, it was about more than the manuscript. He has that line, that classic.
Right.
So I'm like, why are we even talking about this? Like, we've never worried about this in the first part, that's why he's there. And, like, you would think if they had a conversation about his accidental ghosting, that he would say why he came back, because they hadn't taken a break yet during that time period.
Right.
Because according to chapter 35, he comes back and then she kisses him. And they seem to be like, good? Question mark? Like, it's just, like, so weird.
There was a couple moments with this and with Opaline where it's like reconvening with the man and being like, oh, thank God I'm back with the man. And then immediately being like, wait, I'm mad at the man. You know, like, wait a second. Like, we need to go back into, what's the word I'm looking for? Into conflict.
Yeah, which is, like, another way in which to kind of stall their relationship. I think it would make more sense if this got resolved in any way. Like, they still work together to solve the manuscript issue, but the resolution kind of just becomes Henry saying, the manuscript doesn't matter, like, I found what I really was looking for, which is, like, cliche as hell, but, like, that's fine, whatever. That doesn't feel like an earned resolution either, to be fair, but...
And also, like, that whole manuscript thing does truly go unresolved for the rest of the book.
I will say the manuscript and the fact that Martha has it on her back is both unresolved. Yeah. We don't know why that's going on.
We can maybe talk more about that with magic. I'm just like, I don't really understand why the tattoo thing was there.
Yeah, no, it didn't need to be. What else do we need to say about them? I feel like I'm talking in circles about their relationship.
I mean, it's because it's a circular thing, right?
Yeah. Like, I feel like in my mind, I'm thinking of different scenarios, but me saying it out loud, it's all going to sound like the same nonsense. Because that's kind of what happened here.
I mean, we can just talk about, like, kind of the last moment where they do, like, they have their last, like, tiff where Martha is like, oh, like, trauma is stopping me from doing the things I want to do, and the thing I want to do is Henry. Like, that's where they end up back together for real, and they sleep together and all that stuff. And God, was that, like, a frustrating statement to hear of, like, yeah, like, the only thing that trauma is stopping me from is the one true joy in life, a man. Like, this book, it's not, this is why the book isn't hitting for me as like a feminist thing, right? Where it's like, man, like, it really feels like we've focused on men, like, and how men provide happiness somehow.
There is, like, a couple things she mentions all in a go, like, and some of them are important, right? Like, yeah, there is she wants to be with Henry, but she still feels the effects of Shane, whatever. We don't really this is all superficial, like what she's feeling, basically. Stuff we haven't really delved into within the book. But like she mentions that last because, romantic scene in which they sleep together, whatever. She also mentions like feeling out of place because of university and like her issue with reading, whatever it was. And she mentioned something else, but I can't remember right now. But it's also confusing because all of these things she's mentioning, she doesn't have a problem with, supposedly. Like, she is fitting in university. She's reading now. She has a best friend named Logan. Like, she's making connections with people. We don't really see her struggle with feeling out of place at all within the second half of this book.
Yeah.
And we only get it for like a moment in like the first half when she's nervous about applying for university. Like, and then obviously the Henry stuff, like her trauma kind of comes and goes whenever she needs to push the brakes on this relationship. It's like, it doesn't actually feel substantial, these things she's worried about. And especially her having this big blow up about them, it's like she's been going through these things the whole time, and I'm like, okay, but where?
Yeah, like why is this all we're hearing about it?
Yeah. And obviously it's so that we can have like the one thing I really wanted is you, and then so Henry can be like, oh my god, and they can kiss, and then you can have the big romance scene, and then they can sleep together because that solves all relationship troubles. And then like they're settled now. They figured it out.
So ridiculous afterwards. They're like, oh my god, like, are we partners now? Oh my god, we should just get married. I was like, what is happening?
So
Why are we
crazy.
teenagers all of a sudden?
Yeah.
But they end up together. Whatever.
Whatever.
This book, it's a reminder that this book is not actually, in my opinion, about trauma. It's a romance. That is primarily what it is. There's just trauma on the side.
I agree. Yeah. It's used to try and bring some depth in like the easiest way possible, garner sympathy in the easiest way possible, but really it's kind of just like there.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, it's true, and I don't like it.
No, for sure. It's the worst.
Unless you have anything else, we can move into talking about the magic bookshop aspect.
We've kind of talked about it a little bit. The only reason Martha and Henry are still interacting, kind of, other than their love for each other, is kind of this Lost Bookshop. Martha is obviously being handed this information. I feel like she doesn't care so much about thinking about all of it. She and Henry kind of finished the book around the same time, but she's had it for months longer. I don't actually know how long this book is, timeline-wise, but she's like stretching it out. She wants to like experience it. She's not worried so much about just digging into the information of it and then the magic associated with all of it. She still thinks it's Madame Bowden giving her books. Like, girl, you have a tree growing out of your ceiling. What are you talking about? But her and Henry are just insane about magic. They just accept the tree, they accept the books, they accept this magical bookshop.
Yeah, I guess it's just not a focus really in the end, so I think that's why, right? Like, it just has to get brushed off.
Right. Which is why I would say you don't need it.
Yeah.
Most of this stuff could just be solidified into the bookshop being magic, which would include like Madame Bowden and like all of that stuff, but there's just like Martha being able to read people didn't need to be in this book.
Yeah, and she has this big moment where she's like, and I don't plan on hiding it anymore. And I'm like, when was that even a problem?
Right. And also it's like such a non-issue because it comes up at the end of the book, but Henry gets read and learns what that means. And he freaks out about it, as would be understandable. He tries to clear his mind. He's like, she's reading my thoughts. That's weird. But then, like, they don't talk about that. It's like, sir, you're about to marry somebody that has magic. And, like, we're not talking about it.
She's also so like, confused. I don't read minds, I read stories. It's like, or you just read his mind.
Yes, it was for sure such a reading of the mind. So, like, get rid of that. It was clearly supposed to be some kind of tie between Opaline and Martha, but also like Opaline doesn't really use that magic either. She can sometimes hear the books and like they're comforting for her, but like get rid of it. Get rid of Martha's reading, get rid of the tattoos. Like that was never explained, and there's just no point. Like why? Like there's no explanation as to why it's happening, and also there's no need to have it at all to begin with. Like it doesn't make sense. monetarily, it doesn't make sense for Martha to spend money to get a tattoo, and like magically, it doesn't make any sense.
Think about the amount of money she's probably spent on all those tattoos.
Right, but somehow she's so poor at the beginning of this book. Like, I don't
but she could just walk on up to the tattoo parlor, get a session immediately.
Yep. She's also getting weird dreams, and like we're just kind of like, the end of this book is kind of like you have to turn off your brain a little bit, because Henry is experiencing these magical things, but he still doesn't really believe, but he trusts Martha, so that's enough for him, which is fine, but also there is obvious magical stuff happening, so it's a little unbelievable that he can't believe. And then Martha, it's like she doesn't think about it because she's not supposed to think about it. Like, it's so, she's home is basically what the idea is within this bookshop. And so like the tattoos and the book and like the weird dreams and like Bowden just disappearing and like all of that stuff, it's just like she doesn't worry about any of it because magically she's not supposed to worry about any of it. And I'm like, what? Why? Why?
Yeah, it's just a little unsatisfying. I think there's kind of a line between suspending disbelief and this, you know. Like, I feel like you do need to give it either some context, some motivation or something in order for us to take that, in order for us to be like, yeah, sure, the magic is believable. It's not built up enough for that. Like, yeah, the tattoo thing really bothered me, honestly. Like, why introduce this like magical tattoo that never it never comes up again.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at all. And then I think like Martha getting information from the bookshop about like Opaline's life through the book, and like that gets dragged out so much, and she doesn't investigate any of it because she has to be basically going the same speed as Henry within this investigation, I think is the point. But yet Henry can't investigate anything, right? Like, we get Google the first time from Martha, and the one other time we get like an investigation scene, quote unquote, is like Henry's lost his funding. I'm surprised he got funded.
I know. I was like, wait, he was funded?
I know. I was surprised. And so he spends a night like researching at 100% into like the Jane situation, because he finds like one letter from her about like an asylum and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, so this is year 100. What were you doing before that? And he does say he would spend most of his time walking around where the bookshop's supposed to be, waiting for it to show up. And I'm like, oh my god, you're an idiot. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, he deserved to have his funding cut.
For sure. And then immediately after the scene, when he and Martha go to the asylum, he's so annoyed. I mean, he's jealous kind of Logan, but like he's so annoyed about everything, and he's like, this is just a wild goose chase. And I'm like, sir, you just said you're going to research at 100%. Get your act together.
Right.
You're going to the place. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he's so back and forth about whether he cares or not, and like how much effort he's putting in. He should have been researching like this the entire time. But also the issue with that is this mystery, quote unquote mystery, is so simple. Like, it's so easy to find information on it, supposedly, that it wouldn't have actually taken the entire length of a book.
Yeah, he's bad at it. I don't know. I feel bad because it's like, I don't know. He's like a PhD candidate or something, right? Like, he's supposed to be good at this thing, but it's a good thing that they end up owning a bookshop and keeping it there.
Yeah. So yeah, they're both just working so slowly to like arrive basically to a destination that doesn't matter in the end, right? Because for Martha, it's like coming home. It would be given to her anyway. And then for Henry, he's supposed to realize that Martha is really what he's supposed to be finding, and so the manuscript and kind of the bookshop as well don't really matter in what he should be focusing on. But like that doesn't feel like earned. Even going up an attic and then up an attic, like you're experiencing magical stuff and still you don't believe it, for one thing, and also you're fine with it at the end. Like at the end they don't end up finding the bookshop the first time,
right? And
they we like don't see that come down. Like
so
we don't
weird.
See how they deal with that.
When the Martha chapter opens up with she's like, I had a bad dream or something like that, I was like, wait, weren't we somewhere before? Like,
right?
What? How are we dreaming right now?
It was so weird, and like, but it's supposed to be chill, and then they're in the bookshop, right? And I guess it's supposed to be like they're not you find it as long as you're not searching
exactly.
for it.
It's because they stopped
situation.
wanting it, right? But that's stupid.
It
For
is.
me anyway, I just don't like that because I thought it was going to be a point of, that chapter opened and it was like, oh, okay, they didn't find the bookshop because it wasn't about the bookshop really, right? Like it was really about these other things, about the relationship, whatever. Finding themselves even, but then they're immediately thrown into the bookshop. And I'm like, so why did we learn that lesson then? Like if we were just going to go to the bookshop anyway, to me, it was wasted time and maybe it was artificial suspense. You might as well have put the bookshop at the end of the attic. Like it's the same.
Yeah, that and like also the idea that they didn't find the manuscript is false, right? Because Henry got everything he wanted, right? He got the bookshop and he got the manuscript. Because it's on Martha's body. Like,
right.
He's the only one that has the manuscript, and he might not be able to sell it to anybody, but, like, he still found the things he was looking for kind of at the beginning of this book. He just can't make a name for himself with it, which I guess is the point, but, like, also just take away all of those things. Like,
Yeah, it's not needed. They didn't. I'm like frustrated they did get into the bookshop. I think it's silly that this book didn't lean more into the bookshop than it did. But given that it didn't, like, there was actually no reason for them to go in it other than just be like, ooh, ah, and then it's over. Like a theme park ride or something. Like, it wasn't actually of value to them. There was no, like, I don't understand what the plan was for finding it, honestly, especially if they weren't going to be able to reproduce it. So it's just like a checking the box action as opposed to being meaningful.
The bookshop had a good idea, and I feel like it could have been very impactful, but it became so background. Mostly because Martha doesn't look into it, and then also because we just don't spend any, like, time there, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, also, like, it doesn't end up actually being the bookshop we start off in, which felt like the implication. Like, Martha just kind of has a random other bookshop in Dublin.
Is it not the same bookshop?
The kid asks if it's still there, and she's like, yeah, it's still there at that, like, the building is still there, but it's something else now, or like a house or something.
Oh my god, wait, okay, that can't be real. That's in the prologue?
In the epilogue.
Oh, I think the implication is that number 12, the house, is still there, but owned by somebody else. The bookshop is technically number 11.
Oh.
I will say, like, I think the merging of number 12 and number 11 doesn't make sense. Unless, like, we're supposed to realize that number 12 has been number 11 within the context of this book the whole time. Because Bowden is the shop, or Opaline, or somebody. But, like, yeah, I understand your confusion on that part. Yeah. I'm actually like, is it the same? But I do think number 11 is the bookshop. So I think that's where they are.
That's weird. Yeah, that wasn't clear to me. It felt distinct. Yeah, I don't know. The ending feels very unclear to me now.
Yeah, I guess it's weird because it's like they say, is number 12 still there? But it's like, that would be the house next door.
To it, yeah. That's
so, like, why are we asking?
I think it isn't the same. I think Martha made her bookshop based on the idea, not that she, like, found the bookshop in a repeatable way where she then took it over. Like,
that's so weird.
I had this thought earlier in the book of, like, what if, like, crazy idea, like, what if the bookshop is just the house now, right? Like, why is it that we're looking for this bookshop? I guess because Henry saw it. But, like, if it exists only kind of in this magical realm, it's not useful. Also, it could just be that, yeah, like, you find it by being at number 12 or whatever, because maybe that's where it was before, but it isn't actually a thing now. Like, in order to have it be a bookshop now, you'd have to transform a building back into one.
The confusing part is, like, at the end of the book, when they go up the stairs after waking up not finding the bookshop, the stairs say, like, the quote that the first Fitzpatrick had written on them, like the being lost, being found, whatever quote it is. Mm-hmm. So I think I think they do end up at the bookshop. Okay, I said that, and then I remember the scene afterwards where they're in the bookshop and they see, like, the stained glass and stuff of Opaline. They're in the shop. That happens. So yeah, I guess I had just assumed they found the shop and they stayed there. But then that would make you think the house had transformed back into the bookshop. But then that's number 12 becoming number 11. So number 12 wouldn't be there. So maybe Martha had just been, like, brain fogged into thinking she was at number 12 the whole time, but she was actually at number 11.
Maybe. Now I'm more certain that she just started another shop.
Somewhere else. You know what? let's just call this one a plot hole. Let's just not think about it.
Yeah.
Let's just finally get into the reviews, I suppose. I've talked about it before that the manuscript itself did not need to be in this book at all. If you wanted to mention it, sure, right? Like, I guess that's fine. The fact that this author wrote it or pretended to, and because she wanted to stick it on Martha's back or like sew it into Opaline's skirt, whatever, just pretending that you are Emily Bronte and writing her lost manuscript for the purposes of nothing. For the purpose of maybe we shouldn't find this manuscript. Maybe it should stay lost. Like, that's the conclusion. And so including it and trying to write it just felt so disrespectful to, I assume, the universe you are trying to give respect to. Because I do believe this author probably loves Emily Bronte and, like, this literary scene. But I just found this so disrespectful, to be honest. So that and all of the issues I had with the book as well, I was playing between like a 1 and 2 because I think there are some things that could be interesting, but the boldness, I think, of this manuscript decision really makes me want to put it at a 1 star. I think it's just so crazy to think you could do that for the purposes of nothing.
Yeah, I guess that's like the key point, right? Is it didn't pay off. The risk didn't pay off.
Right. And even if it did somehow pay off more, there was no reason to write actual lines from this manuscript. Like, you didn't need it. You didn't need to pretend to be Emily Bronte.
Yeah.
You could have just mentioned the manuscript by name, and that would have been interesting, right? You would have shed a light on an interesting lost manuscript, and that could have been cool. But, like, I don't know. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I similarly, I didn't feel great about this book. I think I kind of said it towards the beginning. There are things that feel like they were supposed to be deep and complex, but just felt more like a distraction. And I wasn't invested in the characters. I mean, that's really, I think, the biggest thing I can say about it is I wasn't bought into the characters. I don't think the fact that they experienced trauma made me feel any closer to them. Sympathetic, yes, but closer, no. I respect what the author was trying to do in telling the sorts of stories she was, but I just don't think she did them justice. I don't think it doesn't make sense to me to include all of these stories of trauma and not really explore them further. I don't like the idea that trauma is being used as a tool, and that's what it felt like here, and that kind of gives me the ick. So I didn't feel good about reading those parts of the book because it both, like, we don't really see recovery as a point of the story. We don't really even see like the mental exploration of what that feels like. I mean, a little bit from Martha, but that not enough that it feels right. So it's the ickiness of that part that really puts this book down for me. And I didn't enjoy myself because of that. Like, I didn't enjoy myself not feeling like I liked the characters or what they were understanding, what they were going through enough. So that being said, like, I feel like there's a target audience for this book, and it's just not us. Like, I do think that the book offered a lot of good conversations for us to have. Like, we were able to have kind of the historical conversations, and the conversation we did have last episode about posthumous release of books. Like, there's a lot of interesting topics that the author was willing to bring in the book that I think were cool. And I think that some of these other parts of the book, particularly the romance, probably land a lot better for other audiences that aren't us. So, like, I'll give her credit for those. This is a romance and a historical fiction, but I think it's a romance first and a historical fiction second. And I didn't mind the historical fiction part. I have never enjoyed ever before looking up historical things related to a book, but I kind of did for this one. Anyway, all that is to say, I think I'm going to give the book a 2 for myself. I think I at least hope for the author, based on what she was trying to do and the audience that I think this is for, that the actual like rating that is out there, which I have not looked at, is higher. Because I'm hesitant to talk the book down too much for the general audience. Like, I think it can work, just not for us.
Yeah. And then obviously we always have to end on a good vibe. So do you want to give a good vibe?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at it at the end there, but like this is as far as historical fiction goes, we're always hesitant about it. We've done a couple now, almost inadvertently, but bringing in some real characters that I hadn't heard of before, like Sylvia from the first half of the book, I thought was super cool. Like I did learn something reading this book that is real. And I wasn't expecting that at all. So I thought that was super cool. I like that it was researched and wasn't just people. Yeah, it wasn't just people I had heard of. I mean, there were people I had heard of, right? Like James Joyce and Ernest Hemingway, and they got their own representations as well. But really, yeah, like Sylvia for me, I should be specific. It is Sylvia that I thought was the coolest. There were other aspects of history that I got to look up in this episode too, even though that was for a disagreement. But Sylvia, I was like, that is a cool character I hadn't heard of before. And that is like doing the job of amplifying the story of a woman who maybe doesn't get that otherwise in literature. So I thought that was awesome.
For sure. I think for my good vibe, I might go with the library/bookshop. Just because it was given like a lot of interesting backstory, and then also was kind of a character in Opaline's storyline. The story of it and like what it could do for people, I think was a very interesting concept. I think it was enough of a concept on its own. I just wish we had gotten more of it, I guess. Like either through being a character to Martha because it recognizes her, or like, I don't know, us actually just getting to spend time in it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'll say that's my good vibe.
Yeah.
I also had a fun idea of the idea of this book kind of being about stories that change you. And then also it's Thanksgiving. And so it might be nice to talk about stories or a story that we are thankful for or that we have felt changed by. If you're up for it, John, of course.
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So for me, this is kind of also a Halloween recommendation because we forgot. But there is a video game called Dredge. And it's like a fishing game. And it's also kind of a horror game, but like not so terrible. Like I'm afraid of the dark and also the ocean, and I could play it, so you'll probably be fine. But I felt like very struck by the story of this game. And I'm trying not to give away spoilers as I talk about it. But I think really what like resonated with me, and it kind of ties into what we talked about with this episode too, is it's such a simple story. The theme of the story and the theme of the entire game is kind of very simplistic, and it's something we've probably heard a million times before, but it's just told so beautifully. Of course, it has the addition of like art and music to kind of help it along, different forms of text which can help it as well. You have characters, you have like journal entries, all of that kind of stuff. So it's told in a very kind of smart way. Like you do have to think about it to kind of put the pieces together, of course. But once you kind of experience the ending or endings, like everything does kind of come together quite well. And it's also just very impactful the way it does. And of course, there's like side characters and side stories. And I think all of those, if you don't include the DLC, all of those main stories just feed into the theme kind of the entire game and that main storyline. And everything just kind of benefits from each other. But it's still so simple. It's so simple. But I think it's just still so impactful. And at least for me as like a writer, it's just like such a good reminder that you don't need everything thrown into the pot. Like you just need one good idea, really. And then you just kind of can just go from there, but it's still one simple thing, right? And I don't know. I don't know if it's just like the mood I was in while I was playing it, but it was just like, if it was a book that we were reading for this podcast, I would have given it a 5 stars because I did get like emotional playing it, I think. And of course, it's also like an organization game a little bit with the fishing, right. So that also gets me. But like the story is what we're focusing on here. Yeah. So I just really loved it. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I still haven't played it yet, even though everyone else around me has. I got to get into it. I think for me, the stories I tend to feel most thankful for having interacted with are usually ones about like a sense of home or finding home, things like that. And so like the things that come to mind most, I guess one would be like the musical In the Heights, which
Mm-hmm.
I will try to distinguish from the movie just a little bit. Not that the movie I think was bad, but just like I think the musical presentations I've seen or been a part of before, kind of truer to the original set of script and music, have done a really good job of that for me. Like, and this is like, of course, because like I grew up in a Puerto Rican household, and that musical is by Lin-Manuel Miranda, like who also grew up on in the States, raised by Puerto Rican. So obviously it's kind of written towards my demographic. But I think it does such a good job of striking the idea of like what home is, both at home and away from home, and which ways, in which places and situations we do or don't feel like we're at home. There's of course some places it falls short. Like I don't think everyone has to literally come physically back home in order to feel at home, right? But it kind of, yeah, it plays with like the diversity of those experiences and kind of how that is different for immigrants versus the children of immigrants versus people who've got deep roots in a place. Like all of that is considered as well, and it's kind of allowed to be diverse for everyone who experiences it. But it speaks to stories that I don't think I see myself in otherwise. Like other stories about this I don't typically see myself in, whereas this one I feel like strikes the right tone for me. So that's probably the biggest one. I'm going to throw a second one in there that's similar in its topic of home, but from a very different angle. It's this book I read in college called Geographies of Home, by Loida Maritza Pérez. And that book it's much darker than the musical In the Heights. It deals a lot more with like family trauma and like, kind of negative interactions with family and how one contends with that and still feeling at home, and like growing from those sorts of experiences, but still acknowledging that the struggle that you went through when you went through them or as you're going through them. So that one, like, there's a ton of trigger warnings on that one. If you're going to read it, please look it up. It does get graphic, but like the exploration it does of what it means to like be in an immigrant family and deal with like all of the complications that comes with, as well as dealing with what anyone could experience as a family complication, and things like abuse like that are prevalent in the world. Like it does a really good job of investigating kind of in a way that I wish this book did, of investigating what that trauma does for you and how it relates to feelings of warmth that you want to have towards home, or like the feeling that you have for your family, like love for your family, even when they are the ones causing you trouble. So lots of complicated things to address in that book, but I'm really glad that I read it, because I think it really refreshed my perspective on what it means, what home means and what family means.
Awesome. I mean, I'm obviously familiar with In the Heights, but I might have to give that second one a read.
Yeah, I think it's due for a reread for me. It's really good.
So obviously, if you have your own thoughts and theories about this book, or, oh my god, the next book, which I'll mention in a second, but I guess I'll just, whatever. It's 5050_books for the Twitter. We have the Goodreads, the YouTube, blah, 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 all in the description. What are we reading next time? So it is called In the Winter Woods by Isabel Adler. Halfway would be up to, but not including chapter 10. It's kind of cozy mystery, so it seems like regular guy Declan he's a writer. He needs a new hit. He went away kind of to like a family cabin to try and clear up that writer's block, and he gets kind of involved in this murder case
Or he's maybe a suspect too.
Yeah, and so it seems like he's gonna have to figure out what's going on so that he is no longer a suspect. And then obviously there will probably be love in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
So that is for next time, and I guess we'll see you then.
Goodbye.